One. Hello, thank you for joining us for the latest of the RGE Open Channel facilitated discussions. We've hit a slight hitch with this session in that we haven't been able to do the live simultaneous broadcast to Facebook on this one, so it means that we unfortunately haven't been able to take any questions live, but we will record this session. If you're watching this, it means it's worked and you can see there, and we will, as always, take any of the points that we think are worth exploring in any more detail and explore them in subsequent editions of Registered Gas Engineer magazine. The topic we're looking at tonight is insights around complaints, concerns, queries from customers, from engineers, and from others. And I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues to provide some insight on here. Sorry, I'm Scott Darroch, I'm Head of Strategic Communications and Engagement. I'm joined by Alistair Pearson, who is the Customer First Lead for Gas Safe Register, and by Carl Bannister, who is our Technical Support Manager. So just before we start to look at some of the areas that they're going to talk through, complaints are an area that we are all likely to be familiar with at one point or another through our working lives. I think no matter how diligent, how professional you are in your work, if you work for long enough, you will at some point have to deal with complaints, justified or unjustified. And it's a useful one for us. We thought it would be useful for you to talk through some of the complaints and concerns that we receive from consumers, sometimes about registered businesses and engineers, the kind of complaints or concerns we get about Gas Safe Register, and also some of the complaints or concerns that are raised often by engineers about engineer competence. And the idea with this is to explore some of the recurring themes or hot topics that we see come up, because ultimately we all want to get to a position where if some simple changes can be made that reduce complaints, it's less for us to deal with. It means we can focus on gas safety issues, which is what you want us to do, but also means that even for you as a registered business, if a complaint turns out not to be justified, we know it can be stressful, we know it can be time consuming to deal with a complaint to get out of the other side of it. So we're going to have a look at some of those things. First up, I think I want to throw this over to Alistair Pearson to give an initial overview on how we deal with complaints, concerns, even some of the language that we use when we talk about those things. Alistair.
Hi, thanks, Scott. So I think touching on that point about the language, the phrasing that we use, I think that's probably a good place to start, because we are changing some of the terminology. So it's previously existing, we've been referring to them as a complaint when a consumer contacts us about a concern about gas work or about a registered business. We're stepping back from using the word complaint, because in that context, it's probably setting the wrong expectation, because quite often someone will contact us and they may not really know exactly why they're contacting us. It can be about a range of things, and quite a lot of those will not be in our remit. And therefore, what we're going to start to focus on is referring to it as a gas safety concern or just a concern, because that is truer to what we're here to deal with. Our remit covers gas safety, so we can definitely help with those issues. But when it comes to something that might be contractual or otherwise outside of our remit, we're positioning it with that wording so that we can step back from that and give a clearer explanation to the consumer at the first point of contact. And that probably
as we go through some of those things, Alistair, so that's useful on the reason why we talk about concerns rather than complaints, because often it's a query as much as anything else. What are the steps that we follow when someone makes contact with us? If a consumer makes contact with us with a concern, with a complaint, a query, what's the process that we go through?
Yeah, so the first step in the process is, I guess, an information gathering stage, where someone's, more often than not, it will either be through our website. So if it's through the website, there's already a form filled out, which will have a certain amount of information on it. We still may need to contact that consumer to get a bit more information. So perhaps more precise detail about an appliance or the business that they may be referring to if they've not been able to provide that information. So that's the first step. It's a bit of an information gathering stage and an assessment of the actual query. Is it really a gas safety issue? Is it might be about the plumbing work rather than actually, so it may be about a gas installation that's that's happened, but actually the issue is with the radiator, which wouldn't fall under us. That we would have to refer them elsewhere. But once we've gained that level of information and agreed that it does fall under our remit, next step is to start to arrange the inspection if that's warranted. So we'll pass that through to our scheduling team, who will coordinate when we've got availability for an inspector to go out to that consumer and offer them an appointment. And then more often than not, provided the consumer agrees, we will invite the registered business to that inspection. And then following that, we issue the report with any defects that may have been identified will be noted in that, and we will give a deadline for completion of that. That will go out to the consumer, to the business, and also if it happens to be a tenanted property, it will go out to the landlord as well. The final stage really for us is a follow-up stage. So we just make sure that the defects have been corrected. Ideally, we will receive a defect completion form back from the business to confirm they've done that. Occasionally, we might have to follow up with the consumer, or the consumer may contact us to say they're not sure that's all been done correctly. So there might be a little bit of extra work there. And then once that's done, the final stage really is just if for any reason the inspector wanted to follow up separately with the business on any matters that he's identified, that will also be arranged at that point.
So obviously not every concern or complaint that's raised we always get to a resolution, but sometimes that's not the resolution that the consumer wants, because actually there's an education piece here, and we explain to them, what's within our remit, what's within our area of interest, whether it falls onto something that's a commercial dispute or other things. So quite a lot of this process is then often about educating the consumer a little bit about remit and about some of the things that we can and can't deal with, because obviously someone may feel that someone has to look at this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that falls within our remit, or even that's the responsibility of the engineer who's maybe carried out that work.
That is true, and that can be quite a challenging situation, because quite often, as you say, someone has got a desired outcome and they're not getting what they want. So it is about us being able to be clear with that and help explain that to the consumers, and I guess as well for the engineers. Certainly, they probably get the same types of contacts sometimes. Again, they face a similar challenge in trying to explain the different elements of who's responsible for what and who can assist with those certain issues. I guess also it leads into, I think, what we were going to touch on, which is we sometimes receive complaints ourselves in that situation.
As we get things through, do we see common themes for a lot of complaints or concerns that come in from consumers? I mean, there will be a few regular topics that will that don't necessarily require a whole lot of digging, because they fall under one of a couple of pots. So what I think we want to try and identify, if we can look at themes and things that we're often contacted about, we then, I think the next stage of the discussion is then to look at what advice we can give engineers on how they can mitigate against some of those things coming through. So what are some of the main areas that we are approached with?
One of the most common reasons for us getting that contact from a consumer will be in relation to the building regulation certificate, and then them not having it. So quite often when we get those, it's relatively quick for us, because we can check to see if the appliance has been notified. In a lot of cases, it has been notified, and we'll be able to see that actually the certificate has gone to the registered business's registered address at their request, rather than direct to the consumer. So we can just refer the consumer in that instance back to the business, or if they've advised us they're not getting a response, we can contact the business directly. And I guess for me, that's a case of, that's absolutely fine that happens, and that's fine. It's not an issue for it to go to the business directly, but there's probably a step there where just making sure that expectation has been explained to the consumer, that if they're expecting this certificate, which obviously a lot of them are, they know that they're not going to get it directly, and it will be sent to them by the business in due course. Obviously, we're not aware of that relationship, and but we can certainly help sort it out when we're contacted.
And I think we'd see that a few times, that sometimes it's for those who are in the industry, for us, for working engineers, we work with these systems and processes every day. We know the terminology, we know the time frame that things can take. But for consumers, it may be the only time they're thinking about their gas appliance this year. It may be, if they're getting, a boiler replacement or something done, it may be the first time they've thought about that for a number of years. So is some of this about clear communication with the consumer, and just, if an engineer just takes those 5 minutes to walk through the timeline of what's going to happen, and this is what I'm going to do when I'm coming in. I'm going to undertake a service, or I'm going to undertake a safety check, and here's how these things differ. Here's what I'll have a look at. At the end of that, I'll fill in this piece of documentation, and I'll leave that. You'll see that in a few weeks. I'm doing this, or I can't move this particular appliance because there's a regulation around here. Is that often the one thing that an engineer can do at the beginning of a process that actually would probably result in many calls not coming to us at all, because there's that clear setting of expectations?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would definitely help. And I guess as well, the other thing would be, if something has, during the job, if something's come up that means it's not quite going to go as smoothly as you might think, probably explaining that and explaining what the solution is and the time frame for that. Because sometimes we'll get a contact to say, the job I've had a boiler installed, it's supposed to be completed on this date, it's not done, it's not come back, it's not safe, I don't know what's going on. And actually, it's not unsafe in most cases. I would imagine it would have been made safe either by not being connected or by other means. And there's probably a requirement that's being fulfilled to come back and work on that, but the consumer's not understood that, or perhaps not understood the reason why there's a delay. So yeah, definitely, I think in those instances, like you said, and in that situation where something unexpected has come up, just really making sure the consumer understands what that means and why.
And Carl, you're part of the technical team. The overwhelming number of calls that you deal with are from engineers and are on technical support matters. But of course, you also take calls from consumers. And while we always said that we wouldn't give technical advice to non-registered people, you wouldn't expect us to do so, we can give more general safety advice around here, but people will often come to you with questions around here. Again, are there other themes for the kind of questions that you're often asked? Or, when someone comes and says, I've got an engineer here and he says he can't move a flue to within a property line, are there some recurring themes that from a technical perspective, you and the team see more of?
Yeah, we do. Like Alison mentioned, a lot around notification. It's the simple things. Maybe the condensing pipe hasn't been installed how they thought it was going to be. Flushing is a big question for us. How do I know it's been flushed? And again, it's all down to managing expectations and education, and speaking with your customers and dealing with them on a more of a personal level, just showing them what you're doing, I think. And that would probably quell quite a few questions on our way that come from customers and concerns.
I mean, there's no shortage of guidance and legislation that supports the work of registered engineers when we go through. And I know that you and the team, again, have access to a lot of that material. Consumers' comfort as well, that says, no, your engineer is not, he's not trying to pull a fast one here when he says that a cooker, a gas hob can't be within a certain distance of an openable window or other things. And we often ask to provide that little bit of comfort that says, he says there's a reason that he can't do that. Is he pulling my leg here?
Yeah, you broke up a bit, but I think I've got the gist of that. Yeah, so basically, if they're having an installation of an appliance like a hob, like you say, and you say, oh, you can't actually go there because of X, Y, Z. It's for people to understanding why. Sometimes you don't get shown in the manufacturer's instructions or shown from which standard this comes from, and obviously these standards aren't easily accessible to engineers, never mind the members of the public. So it's about proving that point, I think, because sometimes customers may think they just getting a little bit of a white lie and he didn't want to do X, Y, Z. It's about proving the point why it can't go there.
So that thing that reinforces what we said on the consumer side of things as well. This is that the importance of clear communication. So, you know, if an engineer is standing in front of someone saying, I know you would like this moved at this point, but I really can't. And actually, I can show you the technical standard that shows I don't expect you to understand it in detail, but, you know, I can provide you with a little bit of evidence here. If you need to speak to Gas Safe Register, they'll confirm that that's the case. You know, it makes for a more educated consumer is one who's less likely to have a concern that it falls under the heading of kind of unreasonable. Not that
it gives them more confidence in what you're saying as well to them as well. So, you know, always point them in our direction if you want to confirm anything. The technical department or even the customer service department are always there to help. So it stops it going from up to a concern or next level. It just brings in a general conversation. We can then bring up the information and say where it comes from if you haven't got it to hand, and it just quells any argument it might be building.
And I think I think that's a useful point as well. Is we talk about complaints and concerns as potentially negative things here, but actually some of the communication activity that you would undertake to head off any potential complaints are actually really good practice anyway, because it's reinforcing to your customer that you are compliant with the regulations, that you know what you're doing, you have their best interests at heart by only doing something that will be compliant and do that. So I think with things like that, and then even Alistair, to bring you back in on that a little bit as well, if a customer's had a bad experience and they're off, you know, they might sometimes be looking around for different things that they may feel they have cause to complain about. So even things like encouraging engineers to show ID cards and other things when they arrive, clearly explaining the job at hand, are these all things that we see raised to us as part of complaints and concerns?
Yeah, we will get comments like that to say, quite often that will be connected to perhaps, so the ID card thing, I think, would be connected to when the concern is related to a landlord as well. Because we'll quite often get asked the question, well, how do I even know the engineer who come that my landlord is sending is even registered or competent? So actually, yeah, showing your ID badge in that situation definitely would help, and it will help, you know, help the businesses too, because they won't get asked those questions.
Yeah. But that's it. They feel like relatively simple things to look at as things that you could change to offset any criticism or complaints. But it's quite a useful little one to do. Thank you for that. We said we would have a look at not just issues raised by consumers about registered businesses and engineers, but also instances where there are complaints against servers for Gas Safe Register. And again, just as we said at the beginning, when you undertake a large volume of work, it's inevitable that there will be some things go through. We work very hard to learn and improve in anything that comes through. But Alistair, is it worth just a few minutes just on what the processes are and how we internally deal with something when we get a potential complaint against the register?
Yeah, so obviously we're dealing with hundreds of concerns a week from consumers and calls from engineers and businesses. And yeah, occasionally we do get complaints raised against the register and the service that we've provided. And what will happen when we receive those is they are logged into our system and acknowledged, and we will respond within 5 working days of the date that we acknowledge it. They'll normally be reviewed by the relevant department manager and then answered. And a decision has to be made around whether the complaint is justified or unjustified. We have a target or a limit to how many justified complaints against our service we can have in a year. It sits at 10, and for last year we came in at 7, so under target. So 7 in a year. We're dealing with, you know, thousands of concerns and interactions. Is not a huge number. We'd like it to be less, and we're working hard on that. But yeah, we did receive 7 justified last year.
And those things, you know, if something has been justified, I think it's important to stress as well that it doesn't stop there where you say that was a justified complaint. What that then almost always results in is, how do we learn from this? How do we just as we're suggesting ways where registered business can take some small actions that might have a big effect on reducing potential complaints that come through. When we get those things through, we can all vouch for the fact that they're taken very seriously in terms of feeding that back into our own processes. Where can we learn? Where's there a training requirement? Where can we improve clarity in our messaging on how we present something? Because it's in our interest not to see that kind of thing happen again. I wanted as well just to touch on a third topic, because we did say that we know engineers will hopefully be quite familiar with RIDDOR reporting, or when they encounter something where there's been a potential or actual source of harm around here. But there will be some cases we know where engineers contact us and say, I've come across a piece of work that's been undertaken by what looks like a registered engineer. It doesn't meet the RIDDOR criteria. I need to let someone know that I've got a concern, or a complaint around here. Carl, can you give us just a little heads up on how we track and what engineers can do to report concerns?
Yeah, no problem.
Gas competence.
This is relatively new. The story behind this is the RIDDOR reporting has been in for years and years and years. But our IGEM G11 changed recently. It was implemented in there. It was agreed that concerns that don't actually meet the RIDDOR process of 11.1 or 11.2, there is now another procedure. It calls for concern. You can raise a concern through the Gas Safe Register website, through the engineer section, or where you log in. This doesn't stop you from ringing in and speaking to us either. We can still do it that way, but in there, it'll ask you quite a few details: property address, the registered business, who the concern is raised against. And us in the technical departments, myself and the team, we deal with them when they come in through the email box. And then there's a process for this. And then we'll get in contact with the registered businesses against, and we'll ask their side. And there's a form they'll fill out. And if it's justified, then we'll put it to the next level, and obviously that's when we'll start to move down the more common process of seeing the inspectors to go out and coming out and safety checking or doing a visual inspection on the installation.
And that's I think people would want some comfort that we're doing some checks and balances here to make sure these are not vexatious complaints and things that are being abused around here. But we do that assessment, we do that triaging of things as they come in and looking at them and saying, right, let's have a look at the evidence here.
Everything's got to be fair and justified, Anthony. We can't just take an opinion on it. But we, if that information comes in, we'll act on it and do the best we can with it. We do contact the customers, have the details there, and they're asked if they want to be contacted. We will contact them and ask for arranging a visit. We do contact the registered business and ask them to fill the form in and ask them if they're involved, because as you said, they may not be all the time. And so we do look at all that, and there is a process we do follow to make sure it's not just we take that and then go and jump on it. We have to all do it fairly.
Thanks, Carl. I think on that point, I think we'll wrap up a little bit, because I think that the recurring themes for me that are coming through is that there are lots of small things that we can do to make sure that you minimize your exposure to complaints or concerns. But I think fundamental to all of them seems to be clear communication. The register's in place to provide a little bit of support to engineers, in their communication with their customer when they're acting in their best interests. So the technical team and others are there with evidence to help support an engineer's case when they're trying to reinforce that there may be a legislative matter or a standard that an engineer has to apply. When we get things like complaints that sit outside our remit, again, clear communication from the engineer at the beginning about what they do and what will happen as something goes through is a really good way of heading things off at the pass, and making sure that that things aren't trivial. Things that could have been addressed very easily by clearer communication at the beginning don't result in a bureaucratic process that results in complaints that and no engineer wants to be tied up in. Are there any other points that that Carl, you or Alistair want to pick up, or those are the main themes that come through?
No, I think you're right. I think it's all about managing expectations and education and communication, and there. That's definitely the main ones for us.
And Alistair, any final ones on there?
No, I agree with that. And I think just one final point would be around defects. If we do carry out an inspection and find a defect, just making sure that you do communicate with us that those defects have been resolved, and or if there's likely to be a delay for one reason or another, difficult to arrange to go and do the job, we understand that, but just make sure we know, because obviously if defects aren't corrected, there is potential for further action to be taken via sanctions, which obviously we're keen to avoid when it's not necessary.
Super. Thank you both. And again, apologies for those who were hoping to see this as a live stream on Facebook. We'll get to the bottom of whatever technical changes or niggles have come through on there. We will follow this up in Registered Gas Engineer magazine. We'll give a little bit more detail about the complaints process, about how to raise concerns about gas competence when you see those things, and talk through some processes on how we deal with customer concerns. So I hope this has been useful. I hope it's been interesting for you, and we hope to see you again the next time we do an RGE Open Channel session. Thank you.